If you're learning trigonometry right now and sine, cos and tan aren't making any sense, the angle of depression is making you depressed and you're just not understanding what the angle of elevation is, well, in this video I'll explain everything like you're a beginner and make sure that you understand everything by the end. Trigonometry is about finding unknown lengths and unknown angles in right angle triangles. You can see the little square on the left, that says that that's a right angle. And you can see the little angle on the right hand side, that's what we use to base off the names of the other parts of our triangle. So you can see that we have our little yellow bit that's highlighted here. That's opposite of the right angle. That's always called the hypotenuse. Then we have our little red area that we see here. That's opposite of the acute angle that you see. That's called the opposite. And then you can see we have the blue bit. That's next to the angle, and that's adjacent. Adjacent means next to. I'll label it here just so you can really see the names of these sides. And I'll put a couple of examples so you can really get good at naming the sides. Here are some examples, and we'll have a go at labeling the sides that have a length on them here. So, looking at our first triangle, you can see our right angle right here. The length that's opposite of that is this. So whatever the length is that's directly opposite the right angle is always called the hypotenuse. Or we can label it H. And then you can see that we have a 3 here, and that's next to our little angle. So the angle that we're dealing with, and that's called adjacent. So remember, adjacent just means next to. Now going on to the next one, this triangle here, let's look at our little angle again. This length is directly opposite of that. So this is called opposite. I can just write an O. And then looking at the 1, that's next to this little angle. So that's called our adjacent. Now looking at this one, we have our little angle here again. Right next to it, we have the 3, so that's adjacent. And then looking at this right angle, what's directly across it? Well, the 6 is. So this is the hypotenuse. And then looking at our last triangle here, we have our right angle here. Directly across it is the 12, so that's the hypotenuse. And then right next to our little angle, this is the adjacent. And then obviously this would be the opposite because that's directly opposite of that angle there. What if we come across a triangle like this where it says, find what the length of that question mark is? So let's do what we were doing before, which is labeling the sides. So looking at the angle we have 43 degrees. Right next to it is the 35, and that's adjacent. So I'll label it with an A. And now the other side that we care about is this length right here. And that's directly across the right angle, so that's our hypotenuse. Now this is really useful, and this is where sine, cos and tan come in. So an easy way to remember this is using SOH CAH TOA. And using SOH CAH TOA, we can easily figure out which trigonometry relation we need to use. So looking at CAH, we can actually use cos here. So if we write cos, then you just always write in the angle that you're dealing with. And then we know that CAH has A and H. So you just write the adjacent divided by the hypotenuse. Now here, our adjacent is 35. So what do we need to write instead of A? We just need to write 35. And now we have our H here, and that's the question mark that we're looking for. So all we do now is solve this equation for H like it's a normal algebra equation. So we can multiply this H across, and once we do that, we get H on that side, and this H disappears. And then what are we left with? Well, we need to get the H by itself so we can work out what it is. And we have H times cos of 43 here. So if we divide that across, it moves it away from there to the other side. And what are we left with? Well, then we're just left with H is equal to 35 over cos of 43. If you put that into your calculator, that will give you a number, and that will be the length of our hypotenuse here. Let's do one more example on finding an unknown length. So immediately check if it's a right angle triangle. This one is, so it's fine for us to use trigonometry. Then think of SOH CAH TOA. And now we can look at our triangle and label our sides again. So looking at our angle, 7 is directly opposite of that angle that we're dealing with. So this is our opposite. And then looking at our angle again, the side that we're trying to find is right next to that angle. So that's adjacent. So we have opposite and adjacent. Well, looking at SOH CAH TOA, opposite and adjacent relate to tan. So we can write tan, then you always write the angle, equals, then you do opposite, which is the 7, divided by the adjacent that we're trying to find. And now you just rearrange this so we can get the a by itself. So here the a is dividing, so to do the opposite we can times both sides by a, and that will get rid of the a on this side. And then finally, you can see how we have a tan 62 that's timesing. So to do the opposite of that, we can just divide that across. So we divide that across. And now you can see that we're just left with a is equal to 7 over tan of 62 degrees. If you put that into your calculator, that will give the length of this side. Now you might say, okay, finding an unknown side is all easy, but what do I do when there's an angle that I don't know? Well, it's a really similar process as what we did before. So we need to label the sides again after we confirm that it's a right angle triangle, and it is, so that's good. Now looking at the angle that we're dealing with, we don't know it, but still the 3 is directly opposite of that angle. So this is our opposite side. And then looking at our right angle, the 8 is across that right angle, so that's our hypotenuse. Now looking at SOH CAH TOA, which one of these has O and H in it? Well, so does. So we can use sine here. Okay, so we can write sine, and then you always write the angle in there, even if you don't know it. So I'm going to put a question mark in there, and then I'm going to write opposite, which is the 3, divided by the h, which is the 8. And now finally, so the way that normally you deal with algebra to work something out is you do the opposite to get the unknown thing by itself. So here the opposite of doing sine is actually doing sine inverse to both sides. So if I write sine inverse, so it's this little -1 symbol, and then I do it to the other side as well, it actually gets rid of it. So you're just left with question mark, which is the angle, is equal to sine inverse of 3 over 8. And if you put this into the calculator, it'll give you the angle. So let's do one more example. So instead of using the question mark, you'll see this little symbol used. It's called theta. And that's just saying that we don't know what that angle is. So looking at this triangle again, it's a right angle triangle, so we can use trigonometry. And then looking at our angle here, right next to it is the 5. So that's our adjacent. And then looking at our right angle here, directly opposite that is the 8. So that's our hypotenuse here. So looking at SOH CAH TOA, which one of these relates to A and H? Well, cos does. So we can write cos, then you always write the angle, equals adjacent, which is the 5, divided by the H, which is the 8. And then finally, we just need to do the opposite of cos on both sides, which gets rid of it on the left, and then you need to write it on the other side. So if you write cos inverse of 5 on 8 into your calculator, it will give you the angle that we were looking for. A boy standing on top of a vertical cliff sees a house on the ground at an angle of depression of 12 degrees. The cliff is 60 meters tall. How far is the house from the base of the cliff? So let's go through this worded problem together one by one. So let's start by drawing the vertical cliff. So we have a cliff like this, and there's a boy right here, okay? And he sees a house on the ground at an angle of depression of 12 degrees. Now this is what's really important. So angle of depression is always measured like this. Imagine you're looking straight ahead, so imagine there's a flat line. The angle of depression is how much you have to look down from that flat line. So 12 degrees until you see what you're looking at. So our angle of depression is 12 degrees right there. Okay, it's not on this side, it's how much you have to look down from the flat. It's as if you're looking straight ahead, how much you have to look down. So once he looks down, he can see the house all the way in the distance here. And it says the cliff is 60 meters tall. So this thing here is 60 meters tall. And we're trying to find how far is the house from the base of the cliff. So we're trying to find this. That whole thing. Now if you pay attention, that yellow length is the same thing as the yellow length up here. And this 60 meters height is the same thing as the height right here. So that's also 60 meters. This is a right angled triangle now, and we can use our SOH CAH TOA that we've been learning to try and figure out the unknown side x here. So let's label this. Looking at the angle we care about, we have our 12 degrees. Right opposite to it is our 60 meters, so that's our opposite side. And right next to it is the x, and that's the adjacent side. So using SOH CAH TOA, O and A relate to TOA, so that's tan. So like always, you write tan, then the angle we're dealing with, and then opposite divided by adjacent. Our opposite is 60, and our adjacent is the x that we don't know. So now we just need to rearrange this to get the x by itself. So we're dividing by x here, so what we can do is times the x across, and then now you have times tan of 12, and we want to move it to the other side. So the opposite of timesing is dividing the tan of 12 degrees. So divide that across. And you can see how we get x is equal to 60 divided by tan of 12 degrees. If you put that in the calculator, you will get the answer. So you're walking to school peacefully when a squirrel suddenly steals your food, sprints up a lamppost and sits there munching. The lamppost is 18 meters horizontally from where you're standing, and you look up at the squirrel at an angle of elevation of 47 degrees as it judges you. How high is the squirrel above your eye level? So let's draw this. So let's draw the lamppost that the squirrel has climbed, and let's put a little dot for where you are. Okay, that's where your eyes are. Now it says you look up at an angle of elevation of 47 degrees. Now this is where it's useful, really important for you to pay attention. So similar to before with the angle of depression, where it's from a flat line, that was how much you had to look down, and that was the angle that was formed. With the angle of elevation, it's how much you have to look up from looking straight ahead. So you have to look up 47 degrees to see the squirrel on top here. Okay, and now what happens is you form a right angled triangle, and it says the lamppost is 18 meters horizontally from where you're standing. So you know this length here is 18 meters. And it's asking how high is the squirrel above your eye level. So we need to figure out this length here. Now this is opposite because it's opposite our angle, and this is adjacent because it's right next to that angle. So this is A. So using SOH CAH TOA, TOA is what relates here. So we can write tan, always of the angle that we're dealing with, is equal to opposite, which we don't know the actual length there, so I'll just put O there, over adjacent, and we know this is 18. So now to get the opposite by itself so we know what it equals, all we need to do is the opposite of what dividing by 18 is, which is timesing by 18. So I just times that across, and it gets rid of it on the right hand side. So we get the opposite length. The opposite length is equal to this. If you put that on the calculator, that would give you the entire height, and that's our answer.